So in the last video, we talked about why I don't really like using the term PTSD very much. And once again, it's not because PTSD or mental illness in general doesn't exist. They absolutely do exist. It's just that sometimes when we use these terms out of context, they can be very destructive. And so when I'm using this term in this video, I do hope that you guys are really thinking through these things. You're not just assigning yourself this disorder because you're afraid you might have it, but you're really evaluating yourself. You're talking to other people about this, and maybe and hopefully you're talking to an actual professional counselor about these things before you just make assumptions about what you may or may not have. But it is important, that being said, to have a good framework for what PTSD is and how those symptoms do impact us, both for those who have it and for those who are trying to help someone who has it. Because these symptoms can be actually pretty intense. They can actually be pretty disruptive in your day-to-day life. And so understanding them will give you a little bit better capability of coping with them, and for you loved ones out there to be able to help someone cope with the symptoms that they have. So what is PTSD? Well, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a term that we use to describe someone who has unprocessed trauma somewhere in their life. So to use this as an example, your mind is a computer. It's a very advanced computer, actually. And when your brain processes things, it usually processes them and files them away as a memory, much like a computer does. When a computer processes information or data, it processes it into the hard drive and stores it away so that it can access it whenever it wants. When your brain processes something, it stores it away in a memory, and that way it can access it whenever it wants. And even when you go through an event that's particularly horrible and you have a memory of it, at least it's a memory. At least it's something that's a distant thing for you. You know that when you think about it, or when you recall it, or when you remember it, you know it's something that happened. It's past tense. You're past it. It's no longer impacting you in the way that it did when it was happening to you. PTSD is different. What happens with PTSD is there are some people, when they undergo trauma, instead of their brain processing that trauma or processing that event, the brain refuses to do it. Now, there could be several reasons of why the brain would refuse to do it. It could be because the event that was happening was so unbelievably traumatic or horrible that the brain didn't want to process it. It could be that the brain lacked the information to process it, meaning that either you were too young to process what was happening to you, or just the thing was so out of the norm that you had no information or no ability to process what was happening to you, and no one around you had been through something like that, so you were continuously isolated and you really didn't know how to process what was happening to you. So war is a good example of that. When someone goes to war, it's so different, it's so out of the norm for America. It doesn't really matter what age you go to combat. It's such a strange and alien thing to go through that you have no way to process that information. Now, certain people like me developed coping mechanisms that enabled us to not get PTSD, but it didn't really help me process the information in a healthy way and produce it into a memory. For those who can't do that, meaning that they don't have these coping mechanisms to help them deal with that trauma, what happens is instead of it becoming a memory, it becomes almost like a ghost of a memory. It becomes this unprocessed memory that exists somewhere in between a memory and an experience for you. And what can happen is then you are susceptible to what we call triggering moments. So if you've heard anything about PTSD, you've probably heard this term before. What a triggering moment is it's anything that happens in your day-to-day life that reminds your brain of what you went through. It reminds you of the trauma that you endured. And your brain tries to recall that memory, but because it's not a memory yet, instead of your brain remembering what happened to you, your brain re-experiences what happened to you. So a really simple example of this is when I got back from my first deployment in Afghanistan. My buddy took me up to Saltville, Virginia to go to his hometown, and his hometown was having a fireworks show. And I was like, it's really cool. I'm from Tucson, there's not a lot of fireworks shows here. So I was like, okay, it's really awesome, I'm gonna go to a fireworks show. And when they launched the first fireworks, me and him were watching the fireworks go up, and then all of a sudden they went off, and both me and him hit the deck. We lay flat on the floor expecting incoming fire. And all of our friends and family around us were looking at us like, what the heck is wrong with you guys? Like, it's just a firework. Like, you guys saw it go up. Why are you reacting this way? Well, the reason why we were reacting the way that we were was because we weren't actually reacting to the fireworks. We were reacting to the gunshots that happened months ago, because those gunshots weren't properly processed by our minds. They weren't properly processed by our brains. And so when those fireworks went off, it triggered us, and we were re-experiencing, we were right back there in Afghanistan re-experiencing that firefight. Now, why did that happen to me even though I said that I don't have PTSD? Well, the reason why it happened is because when you go through any traumatic experience, everyone, pretty much everyone, is going to have something called ASD, or acute stress disorder. Now, what acute stress disorder is when you go through anything traumatic, you will sometimes, almost always actually, get some of the symptoms of PTSD. And you'll have them for a short amount of time, usually just a couple months. So a lot of people can understand this if you've ever been through a car accident. You may have had a couple months where every time you got behind the driver's seat and you started driving, you got a little shaky, or when someone honked the horn at you, you jumped, or you became a little bit nervous or twitchy. The reason why you're doing this is because you are having symptoms of PTSD. However, if you do have ASD, these symptoms will slowly go away, and that's what happened with me, and it's what happened with my friend. However, there are people where these symptoms don't get better, they progressively get worse and worse. And that's what we call long-term PTSD, or just actual PTSD. So if you're wondering, like, do I have actual PTSD or just acute stress disorder? The easy question to ask yourself is it getting better or is it getting worse over time? So for my friends that have actual PTSD, while we were in together, they were actually pretty functional. But once I got out, that's when their PTSD started to really disable them. To the point where they were having blackouts, they were having panic attacks, they couldn't remember what they did sometimes, they would have violent outbursts, they would become really, really dangerous to be around at certain times, right? That's because their PTSD was not getting better, it was actually getting worse. So because this triggering event happens, and because you are transported back there, the question is, how long can you stay back there? How long can you stay in the past? Well, sometimes it lasts moments, sometimes it lasts minutes, and I gotta tell you, when you're in that state, it could feel like an eternity. It could feel like you're never going to get out of it. You could feel like you're back there and you're stuck there, and it could be absolutely terrifying. And when you go into these triggering moments, that's when your brain goes into fight, flight, or freeze mode, meaning that either you go to fight something, so you become aggressive, or you go to freeze mode, where you just shut down and you freeze up and you can't move, you can't talk, you can't process things at all, or you go to flee mode, where you might even literally run away from the person that's talking to you, or run away from the situation that you're in. Now, this is really negative because, like I said, these will be overreactions. Whatever's happening in your present doesn't merit or warrant the reaction that you're giving, because again, you're not reacting to them or the thing in front of you, you're reacting to what's behind you. It should be very disorienting for you, and it can be very disorienting for the person that is trying to help you through this. Beyond that, that could lead to nightmares. We do know from psychology that dreams are a very important part of your brain's ability to consolidate memories. But like I said, in this situation, it's not a memory yet. It's an unprocessed memory. So when your brain tries to consolidate the memory in a dream, it turns into a nightmare. Where the brain's no longer consolidating the memory, the brain is re-experiencing the nightmare through your dreams. It's re-experiencing everything that you've been through. So you might have the same nightmare, you might have variations of the same nightmare, you might have series of nightmares that are all kind of the same or different events in your life, and it could be very, very unnerving. It could lead to insomnia, where you don't want to go to sleep. Even if consciously you're like, I need to go to sleep, I'm very tired, subconsciously your brain might be keeping you up out of fear of going back into that nightmare. You might go into increased amounts of anxiety when you're moving around your day-to-day life, because you're like, I never know when a triggering event's going to happen. It could lead to shame, where you back away from people. It could lead to great amounts of fear of, like, I don't know if I'm going to hurt someone around me. I don't know if I'm going to be triggered and do something very dangerous or violent. It could lead to people around you not knowing what to do with you. They're like, oh gosh, like every single time this person gets triggered, they go into this crazy mode, and I don't know how to deal with them. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. It's just totally foreign to them. And so it could lead, like I said, to alienation. It could lead to isolation. And in that alienation and in that increased anxiety about what you're going through, your symptoms of PTSD will get worse and worse and worse as you consistently re-experience what you've been through instead of actually processing it. So if that's what the problem is, that also helps us understand what the solution is. The solution is that you have to be able to properly and in a healthy way process what's happened to you. That's not an easy thing, and I'm not going to get into it in this video because it's a much bigger conversation to have, but just know that there is hope, there is healing available if you are able to, using the methods of therapy and counseling as well as relationships in your life, you can over time be able to process those things that have happened to you, no matter how traumatic, no matter how horrible. But at this stage, you have to be saying to yourself, Am I ready to do that? Am I ready to face what happened to me, which could be a very terrifying prospect? Am I ready to think about that? Am I ready to even engage with that memory again because of just how terrible it was? Well, if you do really have PTSD, what I'm telling you is that this thing will be with you for the rest of your life. And it will either be with you in this horrible way, where it's like a ghost, it's haunting you, it's going to trigger you all the time, and it's going to make your symptoms worse, or it could be with you in a manageable way, where even though you will have these triggers, you will have these moments where you're going to be back there, you're going to learn how to cope with it, you're going to learn how to control yourself better, you're going to learn how to bring yourself back and not be terribly afraid of going to that place ever again. These are the things that can happen, and it can actually lead to what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, which is the goal that we should all be shooting for. So in my next video, we're going to talk about some of the coping mechanisms that I used and how they had a negative impact on me. So for those of you guys who have been through trauma who are like, well, I've never had PTSD, this might be more helpful for you, because you might see that, yeah, you've never had PTSD, but maybe some of the coping mechanisms that you use to avoid PTSD may have been also damaging for you. So we'll talk about that next week. So look forward to those videos, and thanks for watching. Hi, this is Peter Martin, and if you're watching this, that means that you just finished one of the videos that I made about my new book, Fellowship of Suffering, which is all about how trauma impacts us and how we can better heal from it through community and fellowship with one another. So if you want to watch some of the other videos from the series, you can go ahead and look at the playlist and check it out. I'm going to be releasing new videos in the coming weeks as I get closer and closer to hopefully the release date of my book, which might happen sometime next year. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like these videos and share them if they are a blessing to you.